Most people think manipulation looks like aggression, someone pushing you, pressuring you, taking advantage of you in obvious ways. But the most effective manipulation today looks nothing like that. It looks like someone opening up to you. It looks like tears, confessions, admissions of weakness. It looks like trust. And because we are taught that vulnerability is brave, that people who share their pain deserve our support, we lower our guard completely. We stop thinking clearly. We start giving our time, our energy, our judgment to someone who has learned exactly how to ask for it. If this kind of thinking is what you are looking for, content that cuts through confusion and gives you real tools to protect your mind, make sure you like this video and subscribe. We go deep here every single time. Number 1, the mechanics of performed weakness. There's a specific dynamic that plays out in many relationships, romantic, professional, and personal, that almost nobody is taught to recognize. A person begins to share things with you. Private things, painful things. They tell you about their past, their fears, their failures. And as they do, something happens inside you. Your instinct to protect and support activates. You begin to feel responsible for their well-being. You feel that to pull back from them, to question them, to create any distance at all, would be a form of cruelty. That feeling is not weakness. That feeling is the natural product of being a decent human being. But it is also, in the hands of the wrong person, the most exploitable thing about you. The Stoics understood that emotion, when it overrides reason, becomes the enemy of clear judgment. Epictetus taught that we must constantly examine what is truly ours to control and what is not. When someone performs vulnerability in front of us, when they engineer a moment of emotional exposure designed to produce a specific reaction in us, they're not asking for help. They're creating a condition in which our reason steps aside and our emotional reflex takes the wheel. And they know, with some precision, exactly where that will is going. They have done this before. The performance was rehearsed, perhaps not consciously, but over years of learning which expressions of pain produce the fastest and most complete surrender in others. What makes performed vulnerability so difficult to detect is that it mimics something real. Genuine vulnerability exists. People genuinely need support, genuinely share their pain, genuinely open themselves to others without agenda. And most of those people are people worth knowing and worth trusting. The manipulator exploits this completely. Because genuine and performed vulnerability look identical from the outside, any attempt to scrutinize the performance feels like an attack on the real thing. If you question someone's pain, you are accused of coldness. If you hold back your support, you become the person who abandoned them in their moment of need. The manipulation is not just in the performance. It is in the trap that surrounds it. Marcus Aurelius wrote extensively about the importance of not letting the actions of others disturb your own rational center. He was not arguing for coldness. He was arguing for clarity. The person who allows every emotional display around them to pull them off course is not compassionate. They are unsteady. They become a resource to be managed rather than a person to be respected. And the manipulator is exceptionally good at identifying the unsteady. They can detect, often within minutes of meeting someone, whether this person will prioritize social harmony over honest assessment, whether they will give rather than confront, whether they can be made to feel responsible for feelings they did not create. The mechanics work like this. The performance of weakness creates an emotional debt in the observer. You see pain, and you feel implicitly that you owe something in response. Reassurance, loyalty, sacrifice, silence. This debt is not something you consciously agree to. It is installed through the same mechanism that makes you want to catch something when you see it falling. It is reflex. And once the debt is established, it becomes a tool. The person who made you feel it can call on it at any time. When they need you to stay quiet, they remind you of their fragility. When they need you to give more, they remind you of their suffering. The debt never gets paid off because it was never real to begin with. The first step toward understanding this dynamic and the Stoics would insist on this, is not to become suspicious of all vulnerability. That would trade one error for another. The step is to slow down the automatic response, to create a small gap between seeing pain and feeling responsible for it. Genuine pain, real vulnerability, does not require your reason to go offline. A person who truly needs support does not collapse the moment you ask a calm, honest question. They do not punish you for taking time to think. They do not make you feel that your own perception of reality is wrong. Real vulnerability invites closeness. Performed vulnerability demands it. Number 2, why modern culture made this worse. The current cultural environment has created a near-perfect condition for this kind of manipulation to flourish. Over the past 2 decades, public discourse has shifted in a way that places enormous moral value on emotional expression and enormous suspicion on emotional restraint. The person who cries is seen as authentic. The person who remains composed is seen as hiding something. Therapy language has moved out of clinical settings and into everyday conversation, giving people a vocabulary to frame their manipulative behaviors in terms that sound like healing. And the result is that we now live in a culture where emotional performance is not just common. It is actively rewarded. This is not an argument against emotional expression or against the value of therapy. Both have their place. The Stoics themselves were not emotionally dead. They experienced feelings and acknowledged them. What they rejected was the idea that emotion should govern behavior, that feeling something strongly was the same as it being true or important. Zeno of Citium, who founded the Stoic school, drew a sharp distinction between passions that arise unbidden and the judgments we make about them. The feeling itself is not the problem. The problem is when the feeling, or the performance of a feeling, is treated as final authority, when it ends the conversation rather than beginning one. Social media accelerated this in ways that are still being understood. The public performance of vulnerability became not only acceptable, but algorithmically rewarded. Confessional content drives engagement. Emotional disclosure builds followings. People learned, again, sometimes not consciously, that sharing their pain publicly produced attention, validation, and influence. The line between genuine openness and strategic performance became difficult to locate, even for the person performing. A behavior that starts as authentic can gradually be shaped by its rewards until it becomes something else entirely. The vulnerability gets repeated and refined based on what produces the strongest response, until it operates more like a tool than an expression. Marcus Aurelius saw this dynamic clearly in his own time, even without modern technology. He wrote about people who perform virtue rather than practice it, who want to be seen as good rather than to be good. The same principle applies to vulnerability. There's a version of openness that exists for the sake of real connection, and there's a version that exists for the sake of influence. The first asks nothing of you beyond presence. The second is always building toward something. The second version is what has become normalized in a culture that has learned to monetize and leverage emotional expression. And because the second version is so common now, people who practice it do not always recognize it as anything unusual. The cultural shift also made it more dangerous to name the manipulation when you see it. If someone is performing vulnerability and you say so calmly and clearly, you will almost certainly be accused of attacking someone in pain. The framing has been set in advance. Their suffering is real and you are questioning it. Your ability to think critically becomes rebranded as cruelty. This is not accidental. Part of what makes performed vulnerability so powerful is that the culture has built a moat around it. Any attempt to examine it with reason gets punished socially. And so most people simply do not examine it. They absorb the message, comply with the demand, and tell themselves they are being kind. The Stoic response to this cultural environment is not withdrawal. It is not cynicism. It is the consistent, quiet practice of distinguishing what is real from what is presented, what is yours to feel from what is being installed in you. what is genuine from what is performed. This practice requires no hostility. It requires no public confrontation. It is an internal discipline, the ongoing examination of your own reactions and their sources. When you feel suddenly responsible for someone else's pain, you ask, did I create this pain, or is it simply being shown to me? When you feel the urge to comply before you think, you pause. Not to withhold compassion, but to locate it correctly. Compassion that bypasses judgment is not virtue. It is exposure. Number 3, the Stoic diagnostic. Real versus performed vulnerability. One of the most practical things Stoicism offers is a framework for examining what is actually happening in a given situation, rather than reacting to what appears to be happening. The Stoics called this prosoche, attention or self-awareness. It is the practice of watching your own mind at work, catching the moment when an impression arrives and deciding whether to accept it as true before acting on it. This is especially important when dealing with emotional situations, where the impression is often most vivid and most likely to be accepted without scrutiny. Fake vulnerability is effective precisely because it creates a powerful impression, the impression of someone genuinely in pain, and that impression is almost always accepted immediately and without examination. There are specific patterns that distinguish performed vulnerability from genuine vulnerability, and learning to observe them is not cynicism. It is perceptual accuracy. Genuine vulnerability, in most cases, does not require a specific response from you. A person who is genuinely sharing something painful may hope for understanding, but they're not monitoring your reaction closely for signs that you are complying. They're not shifting their presentation based on your level of engagement. They're not escalating the emotional intensity the moment you seem to be maintaining your independent judgment. They're simply present with what they feel and honest about it. The discomfort of real vulnerability is one of exposure, not strategy. Performed vulnerability, by contrast, has a specific target. It is built around what it needs you to do. If you look closely at the pattern over time, you will notice that the disclosure always seems to come at moments when something is being requested, when distance is being created, when accountability is approaching, when you're beginning to form an independent assessment. The person does not open up randomly. They open up selectively, and the selections are not random. They tend to cluster around the moments when your clear thinking represents the greatest threat to what they want from you. That is the diagnostic. Genuine pain exists in time and is not perfectly calibrated to your moment of clarity. Epictetus taught that we must examine not only what people say, but what they do when things are calm, when there is no pressure, no performance, no audience. The person who performs vulnerability when they need something from you is almost always different when they do not need anything. In calm moments, between performances, you can often see the person more clearly. There's less sensitivity, less fragility, more directness about what they want. The mask is less necessary. Many people who are caught in relationships with habitual manipulators describe this phenomenon without naming it. The observation that the person they are with seems to change dramatically depending on whether they have something to gain. This is not a personality disorder to diagnose. It is simply useful information about what you are actually dealing with. Another reliable indicator is what happens when you respond with calm honesty rather than reassurance. Genuine vulnerability, when met with honest and thoughtful engagement, deepens connection. The person feels seen rather than just soothed. They're often grateful for a response that takes them seriously rather than simply validating their pain. Performed vulnerability, when met with honest engagement, tends to produce escalation or withdrawal. If you're calm, clear response produces accusations, dramatic increases in emotional intensity, or sudden reframing of the situation so that you become the problem. You have learned something important, not about the other person's weakness, but about the function of their performance. Its function was not connection. Its function was compliance. The Stoic diagnostic is not about building a case against someone or deciding they're a bad person. People who use vulnerability as manipulation are usually not consciously villainous. They developed these patterns in environments where this was the only tool that worked. That explanation deserves understanding. But understanding a behavior's origin does not mean you are obligated to become its target. Marcus Aurelius made this point clearly when he discussed dealing with difficult people. You understand them, you do not excuse yourself from protecting your own rational judgment in their presence. You can hold compassion for why someone developed a pattern while also refusing to let that pattern operate on you. These two things are not in conflict. Number 4. What Stoicism actually asks of you in these situations. A common misreading of Stoicism is that it asks you to be unmoved by other people's pain, that the ideal Stoic is someone who simply does not care about suffering, who watches others struggle and feels nothing. This is not what the tradition teaches. The Stoics distinguished between destructive passions, the kind of emotional reactions that overwhelm reason and lead to poor decisions, and what they call the empathetic, or good emotional responses. These included genuine concern for others, real compassion, measured care. The point was never to eliminate feeling. The point was to keep feeling in its proper place, as input to your judgment, not as a replacement for it. When someone performs vulnerability in front of you, the Stoic path is not to feel nothing. It is to feel what is actually warranted, rather than what is being manufactured. What Stoicism specifically asks of you in these situations is the maintenance of your own hegemonikon, your rational, governing faculty. This is the part of you that observes, assesses, and decides. It is not cold. It is not heartless. It is simply the part of you that functions best when it is not hijacked by a performance designed precisely to hijack it. Maintaining your rational center in the presence of an emotional display is not a failure of empathy. It is actually the most respectful thing you can do for the person in front of you. If their pain is genuine, your clear thinking serves them better than your collapse. If their pain is performed, your clear thinking protects both of you, them from a pattern that ultimately produces bad outcomes, and you for becoming a resource to be depleted. The practical application of this is simpler than it sounds. When you find yourself in a situation where someone's emotional display is creating pressure on you, pressure to agree, to give, to stay, to silence your own honest assessment, the Stoic response is to slow down, not to make a dramatic stand, not to deliver a philosophical lecture about manipulation, simply to slow down, to notice that pressure and to name it to yourself internally before doing anything else. You might say to yourself, I'm feeling pressure right now. Where is that pressure coming from? What is being asked of me? And have I chosen to give it? Or am I simply complying because it is uncomfortable not to? That pause is the beginning of the whole practice. Seneca wrote that the greatest power a person can have is the power over their own reactions. He was not describing a person who suppresses their feelings. He was describing a person who does not outsource their responses. Most of the time, when we comply with performed vulnerability, we are not making a free choice. We are running a script. The script says, emotional pain in front of you requires your immediate, uncritical support. And we run it automatically without ever deciding whether it is actually true, whether we actually have what is being asked for, or whether giving it serves anyone. Taking back authorship of your responses is not cruelty. It is the most basic act of self-determination available to a person. Stoicism also asks you to be honest, not aggressive, not confrontational, but honest. If someone in your life consistently produces emotional displays that correlate with moments when you are about to set a limit, hold an opinion, or create distance, you are allowed to name that observation. Calmly, directly, without accusation. You can say, I notice that this tends to happen when I am about to make a decision you disagree with. I want to take you seriously, and I also want to think clearly. And then you hold to that. The response you receive to that kind of calm, honest observation tells you most of what you need to know. People who are genuinely vulnerable tend to meet honesty with honesty. People who are performing vulnerability tend to meet it with escalation. Finally, Stoicism asks you to take responsibility for your own patterns. If you find that you are consistently targeted by people who perform vulnerability, it is worth asking what in your own disposition makes this effective. Often, people with deep empathy, strong guilt responses, or unresolved needs to be needed are the most susceptible. This is not a flaw to be ashamed of. It is simply information. When you understand what you're offering that makes this manipulation work, you can address it at the root rather than case by case. The Stoics always brought the analysis back to the self, not because other people's behavior does not matter, but because your own character is the only thing you can actually change. That change, when it happens, tends to be the most effective protection against being manipulated again. Number 5, the long game. Building a life resistant to this kind of harm. The goal of Stoic practice is not the management of individual encounters. It is the development of a stable, integrated character. A person whose clarity of thinking, honesty, and groundedness persist across situations, across time, across the fluctuating pressures that life constantly produces. When it comes to fake vulnerability and the manipulation it enables, the Stoic long game is not about becoming someone who is never fooled. That is an unrealistic standard. The long game is about becoming someone who, when fooled, recovers quickly and learns accurately, who does not spend years punishing themselves for having been trusting, but also does not return to the same pattern uncritically. The goal is the gradual development of perceptual accuracy combined with consistent respect for your own judgment. One of the most important long-term practices is what Marcus Aurelius called the morning preparation, the deliberate rehearsal of difficult realities before you encounter them. He would begin each day by reminding himself that he would meet people who were difficult, dishonest, and self-interested, and that this would not surprise him or shake his equanimity. He was not becoming cynical. He was becoming accurate. Most people operate with an implicit assumption that the people around them are largely honest and non-manipulative, and they are repeatedly surprised and destabilized when this turns out to be wrong. The person who has already made peace with the reality that some people operate through emotional manipulation is not more suspicious. They're simply more prepared. They spend far less energy on surprise and far more on response. Building strong personal limits is another long-term practice that Stoicism strongly supports, though it does not always use that exact language. What the Stoics describe is a clear knowledge of your own values, what you will and will not do, what you will and will not allow, not based on rules imposed from outside, but based on a deep understanding of your own judgment and what it requires to function well. A person with clear, internalized limits is extraordinarily difficult to manipulate through performed vulnerability because their response to emotional pressure is not automatic compliance. It is reference to an internal standard. They do not ask, what do social norms require of me in this situation? They ask, what does my honest assessment of this situation require of me? That question takes the manipulation out of the driver's seat. Relationships are also where this practice is most tested and most important. The person who uses fake vulnerability as a manipulation tool tends to target people they are close to because closeness produces the strongest sense of obligation and the most reliable guilt response. Sustaining a Stoic practice inside a close relationship means being willing to have the harder conversations, the ones where you name what you observe, hold your own perspective, and refuse to let emotional escalation substitute for honest engagement. These conversations are difficult. They require a kind of steadiness that most people have not been trained in. But over time, relationships that survive them become stronger. And relationships that cannot survive them, where one party requires your uncritical compliance to continue, were not the kind of relationships that were going to sustain you anyway. There is something important to say about recovery, about what happens after you have been in a relationship, whether professional or personal, where this kind of manipulation was consistent. Many people come out of these situations with a distorted relationship to their own judgment. They were told, repeatedly and through sophisticated means, that their honest perceptions were wrong, that their discomfort was selfishness, that their limits were cruelty. And they began to believe it. Rebuilding trust in your own assessment of situations is slow work. The Stoics would say that this is the central work, not the processing of what happened to you, but the gradual restoration of your confidence in your own rational faculty. That faculty was the target of the manipulation. Its recovery is the real recovery. The deepest thing Stoicism offers in relation to this particular challenge is a framework for understanding why the manipulation works on people who are fundamentally good. It works because care is real. It works because compassion is genuinely valuable. It works because the impulse to support someone in pain is not a mistake. It is one of the things that makes human community possible. The manipulator does not create a weakness in you. They find a strength and turn it against you. Understanding that does not diminish the strength. It simply adds to it the wisdom to deploy it accurately. Care, given with clear eyes, extended to people who genuinely need it, withheld from those who perform the need to extract it, is not lesser care. It is care that has grown up. And in a world that has become increasingly sophisticated in its manufacture of emotional demand, that kind of care is among the most important things a person can cultivate. The most dangerous manipulation you will ever face will not arrive looking like a threat. It will arrive looking like trust. It will arrive looking like someone finally letting you in. And because you are a person who values honesty and connection, your first instinct will be to meet it with openness. That instinct is not the problem. It is actually one of the best things about you. The Stoic work is not to kill that instinct, but to place reason beside it, so that your care goes where it is real and your judgment stays where it belongs, with you. Protect your mind. Not because people cannot be trusted, but because the ones who are worth trusting will never ask you to stop thinking in order to prove it.